Now, over £10 billion worth of universal credit was lost to fraud during the coronavirus pandemic and the lockdown. The Department for Work and Pensions figures suggest that that's up from around £2.1 billion for the previous 5 years. When you break the figures down over the last 2 years, well, you see that for every a pound out of every £8 was fraudulently claimed. 1 out of every £8. Goodness sake. The DWP has revealed its fraud plan, which it says will add thousands of trained specialists to stop fraud in the benefit system, as well as seeking new powers to increase access to bank account data and ensure they can directly arrest suspected fraudsters. They hope it will save the taxpayer £2 billion over the course of 3 years. Let's turn to the Investigations Campaign Manager at the Taxpayers Alliance, who is Elliot Keck, who joins me here in the studio. Elliot, welcome to you. Should we just start on that point about these, I think they were termed by the DWP, specialist investigators? Will they be able to claw these massive sums, or a proportion of these massive sums, back for the taxpayer?
Well, I think the first thing I'd like to say is to applaud you, really, for covering this story so prominently. Other than the Telegraph, I haven't.
Hey, it's my money, Elliot. It's my money and yours.
I haven't seen this covered anywhere other than the Telegraph today, and it's really astounding. And I think it speaks to how immune people in the media and the Westminster Village are to these huge sums of government waste. We've become so used to it. On the issue of whether the government can claw it back, I think their track record so far is appalling. On the bounce-back loans, they reckon about £4.9 billion was lost to fraud, and their aim is to recover about £6 million, according to the National Audit Office.
6 million?
6 million, yeah, that's according to...
I genuinely thought you misspoke.
Yeah, I know, it's extraordinary. Wow. So I think their track record is pretty poor, and we'll wait and see if they're going to take this more seriously.
There's a broader point of principle here, isn't there? And I think, that just to go back to your point about who's covering this story, it's almost a mindset thing. If your mindset is, and I'll be interested to know what Ella thinks of this, if your mindset is it's government money, it sort of belongs to all of us, then you're less likely to be irate about it being fraudulently stolen by people. If you think of it as my money that I've signed off to the Exchequer, then you're more likely to be affronted and personally feel it personally.
Government is very happy to spend a lot of time thinking about how it's going to spend taxpayer money, but it spends very, very little time, it seems, working out how to save taxpayer money, and government needs to absorb this mindset that taxpayers have day in, day out of how to save money where it's appropriate and where to spend money where it's appropriate. So I think you're absolutely spot on that.
Ella, I think it was John Ashworth, Labour's John Ashworth this morning saying, look, the government's let this get out of control. And, I heard what he said, but there was a bit of me that sort of thought, there were so many voices during lockdown saying, people are really struggling. Throw money at the problem. They need the money now. If that means waiving some of the checks, if that means doing it not by the book and leaving open the fraud door, as it were, then that's a risk worth taking. I'm not saying Ashworth said that. I'm saying plenty of people did. And it was right to do it. It was a crisis.
That's the thing. It was right to do it because we know that, as much as the government has a reputation for getting things wrong, and you're right, and screwing up, particularly in relation to its different departments. I mean, it seems like every government department at the moment is in some kind of crisis, some kind of, quite sort of almost mundane bureaucratic crisis in which, like, missing emails or not having the staff to catch up on things and process things properly means, everything just goes to hell. And that's a point. But we also know that the government has got a bad track record of just not being fast enough at things. And, I have spent a lot of time criticising the government. One thing it did get right in relation to the pandemic was just quickly reacting to emergency support, and obviously they got right taking the risk and making quick moves in relation to the vaccine. The question is how, moving forward, how do you prevent these kind of screw-ups? And, whether or not you can claw back the money is, I think probably your pessimism is quite apt in relation to that. But it's the question of how do these things work properly? And, there is a tendency, I think, in all of this to talk about benefit fraud as if there's sort of lots of people who are just sort of on the game trying to game the system. And in actual fact, we have to remember the context, which is that furlough and the kind of support that was given out for many people actually meant a real-time pay cut because, it was given 80%.
I mean, we're talking about fraud. I mean, that sounds perilously close to excusing fraud. And this wasn't a couple of people, sending in fraudulent claims. This was £10 billion worth of fraud.
No, that's the point I'm trying to make. I think that quite often this gets the discussion about benefit fraud tends to lend itself to an argument that says there are just kind of scroungers penny pinching here and there. And in actual fact, if this is a case of large-scale organised fraud from people who are not just dealing with 100 quid here or there slipping through the net, but thousands, if not millions of pounds, then you would think that was something that this government department could get a handle on.
Okay.
Well, I think the really shocking thing about these figures is that we saw about 4.8 billion worth of fraud in 2021, but that actually went up to 5.2 billion in 2022. So absolutely right to make the point that during an emergency, during a pandemic, you need to take decisions which may leave the door open for this sort of activity. What was really concerning about this for me, reading these figures, was that government had about a year to work out how to put a system in place that would allow people to get access to universal credit, but without fraudulent claims going haywire. And what we saw in the following year is fraudulent claims actually went up. So having had a year to work this out, government clearly dropped the ball and the figures went up. And I think that's the really shocking thing about this story.
Elliot Kett from the Taxpayers Alliance. Appreciate you coming in, Elliot. Thanks very much.